Abortion is wrong, but what about the cases of rape? Many make these exceptions, but what about the children conceived in rape? Today I am speaking with just such a person. Her name is Rebecca Kiessling, and she is the founder and president of Save the One, a global pro-life organization focused on defending the so-called hard cases. Rebecca has also had success politically, convincing lawmakers and politicians not to include exceptions in their laws protecting unborn children. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, did you grow up in your biological family?
No, I was adopted and raised actually in a Jewish family, and they were originally from the south of Poland. Well, my parents weren't born there, but my grandparents were born in the area called Galicia, which you're probably familiar with. And many of my family members were killed in the Holocaust. And so I grew up from a young age knowing that there is such hatred which exists in this world, that there are people who would kill innocent others for no offense of theirs.
Goodness me. And, when you were growing up, prior to knowing the events that occurred before your birth, did you experience any kind of interior turmoil or mental health issues? Because even though one doesn't know it yet, those were still events that happened to you and that were traumatic. So was there anything, when you think back, that you can sort of pick up on now?
Well, I mean, I struggled with issues of identity, value, and purpose. I went to 5 years of Hebrew school 3 days a week, and my classmates would remind me, as I well knew, that I wasn't really one of them. I was called derogatory names like bastard because they knew I was adopted, or going to the synagogue. The adults would say, "Oh, who's the little shiksa?" Which is actually a Yiddish derogatory term for a Gentile female. So I didn't look like I was Jewish. And so I sort of had those kind of identity issues from a young age and began to wonder who my birth mother is and, who do I look like? Trying to sort of figure out where I fit into this world and into God's plan, if at all.
Yes, so you knew that you were adopted, but then when did you discover this other part of the story of the fact that you were conceived in rape?
When I was 18, I petitioned the court, I petitioned the state for my non-identifying information. And it had all sorts of details about my birth mother, but all it said for my biological father was that he was Caucasian and of large build. And of course, I thought that sounds like a police description. And I called my caseworker, asked her, was my mom raped? And she said, yes, I didn't want to tell you. I was 19 when I actually met my birth mother. She wanted to meet me. And she told me the horrible details of how she had been abducted at knife point by a serial rapist. And that's how I was conceived.
Goodness me. And, when you discovered this, what was your reaction? I mean, this must have come completely out of the blue for you.
Yes, I immediately thought about what people say about abortion in cases of rape, and that this was like the big justification for people for abortion. I had heard the term product of rape, which is really a very dehumanizing term, sort of like a byproduct. It's not a positive thing. And um, I asked my adoptive father, "How do you feel about abortion? And what about cases of rape?" And he started to tell me that, basically he was pro-choice and that he felt it should be a woman's decision. I immediately challenged him, you watched me grow up, you raised me 18 years, like, you really believe that my birth mother's body, her choice during that temporary time was more important than my whole entire life? Like, you really believe that? And he instantly changed and he had this epiphany and he said, "No, I don't believe that." And then he asked himself, "How would I ever get to a point where I would believe such a thing?" And he began to talk about how, as a professor on a liberal campus, university campus, that he sort of thought that if you were progressive minded, you would be pro choice. But he had never stopped to consider the ramifications of that position, particularly as an adoptive father. And so I learned that I was able to change hearts and minds. Um, One of the first things I did when I learned how I was conceived was to look in the phone book. And I called a right to life office because this was a phrase I had heard. Um, and I just wanted to speak to someone who valued my life. So the woman on the other end of the phone spoke words of value into my life at a time when I was really hurting. And she reminded me of the concept that what man meant for evil, God can use for good.
Gosh, I can't even imagine, yes, the pain of then that playing out also in your adopted family. But what was it like meeting your mother for the first time, your birth mother?
Mm. So first, she sent me a beautiful letter saying that, um, hoping by now that the shock of finding out all the details of your birth are forgotten, for that was not reason enough of having to give up something as beautiful as you were. And it was just a beautiful letter. She went on, and it was very affirming. I arranged to fly home and meet her on her 51st birth date, and it was surreal. I mean, this was sort of an iconic figure in my life, and realized, she was just a person. And it was a little bit awkward at first, but I've called her mom from the time we met, which was nurturing to me, and I felt like it was honoring to her. My adoptive parents were very supportive of me meeting her and just as curious as I was. But a few weeks later, I finally got up the courage to ask her about abortion. And she told me that if it had been legal in Michigan at the time, that she would have aborted me,
Wow.
even if she had to do it all over again. And she
Oh
said,
my word.
it should have been my right.
Oh,
And she maintained that position for the next 6 years, but then she did change her mind about abortion, and now, decades later, we're both so thankful that we were both protected, and we were both spared the horror, the violence of abortion. And out
goodness
of her
me.
her 3 children, I'm the only one she has a relationship with her. I'm the one who honors her. I bring her healing.
Gosh. So when you heard your mother say that, like, I cannot begin to comprehend what that felt like to you. I mean, the fact that she was so open and said this, I mean, how did you feel? How did you start feeling towards her?
I I felt very, um, devastated, panicky. I thought that by meeting my birth mother, it would help me to feel grounded. I was going to find my roots and, um, again, where I fit into this world, it was gonna help bring meaning to my life, I thought. And instead, it was just like this nightmare, to learn that my biological father was a really horrible man, that I was conceived in violence. I felt for my birth mother, but then to hear that she wanted to kill me, wanted to end my life, even looking me in the face saying that if she had to do it all over again, she would have aborted me, was just absolutely horrifying. I mean, she was like, I said, in many ways, my idol, like before I ever met her. And to hear her say that was dehumanizing, demoralizing.
Goodness me. And how did you, I mean, begin to heal from this and sort of come to terms with the fact that, this is part of, your life and where you come from, but that it doesn't define you? Yes, and this process of healing, how did this take place?
So when I first learned how I was conceived, I realized instantly that I was in a position where I would forever have to defend my own life, that I would have to justify my own existence and prove to people that I should not have been aborted. I just didn't think that I'd have to be doing that with my birth mother. Like I said, I had changed the heart of my adoptive father, and I was determined to change my birth mother's heart, that if I could prove myself good enough, she'd see my value and she changed her mind. But, that didn't work. And I also thought that if I could, make myself successful, attractive, like other people would look at me and say, oh, clearly Rebecca shouldn't have been aborted. Um, not because of how I was conceived, but if they looked at my successes, they'd see me as a person of value, that I belong on this earth. Um, and that's kind of, the world's model of success. Like, and in many respects, gosh, it's kind of like the whole idea of eugenics. And, I was very cognizant growing up, as I said, of sort of that Nazi mentality of, who has value. What is a person's worth? Is it, how you look, who your parents are, what religion, how smart you are, how athletic? Like, is your value based upon your successes or your failures in life? If you've messed up in life, if you've had, too many failures, are you worthless? Or if you had, disabilities, I knew that was sort of how the world measures you, or how much money you make. And I wanted to be a person of success based upon the world's standards. And I went to law school, and I just learned quickly that that's not my value. That's not my worth. And it was, I also thought if I could find someone who loved me, then I would have value. And I ended up in abusive relationships. And it was eventually being called back to church that I found my worth. I first came to know who Christ was when I was 16, but after about 9 months, I fell away. And I didn't really have a good foundation. Like, I knew the message of salvation, but I didn't know sort of what God had to say about those issues of value, identity, and purpose until later, when I went to mass and, gave my heart back to Christ, and then went through RCIA. I don't know if you know what that is. It's like sort of Vatican II, the rites of Christian initiation of adults, how you become like a member of, God's family. And the very first day, it was a very in-depth program. It was about 9 months long. We went once a week and we had homework. And we had special guest speakers. And the very first day, we were introduced to scripture of how it's in the spirit of adoption that we're all called to be God's children, which was really revolutionary for me, because I kind of felt like adoption was second best last resort, only for the infertile. And I knew that my parents would not have wanted me if they couldn't, right? I mean, that was the
Wow.
adoption story I was raised with. It was
Yes.
all about their infertility. It wasn't about like God has a special plan for your life, adoption's glorious. It's a picture of God's love for us. There was none of that. And so to learn that, and like I said, the Jewish people are God's chosen, and we learned that in Hebrew school. But my classmates would tell me, "You're not one of us. You're not one of God's chosen." But then, through Christ, I know that I am. because I'm chosen in the spirit of adoption. And that was very, very, I can't even emphasize how revolutionary that was for me. And, Christ talked about like when the storms come, if you build your house on sand, you're not going to survive the storm. But if you build your house on rock, on the foundation of Christ, then you can survive the storms, right? And so I was learning to build my house on a rock, not on sand.
Yes. And just on so many levels, there were so many difficult things that happened in your life. And, many people say that, even putting the rape question aside, they say that basically the attitude of some people are basically better off not alive because of all the difficult circumstances that they will be in after their birth, right? And that right, too many difficulties, it's too hard. It's better for them not to be alive. And what would really be your answer to these people? I mean, how was that for you, and how is your life now?
Okay, so for people who, are Christians, Catholic, people of faith, um, know your audience, right? For them, I'll explain to them that, first of all, I'm not a product of rape or child of a rapist, but I'm the child of a rape victim. And most importantly, I'm a child of God. The rapist is not my creator. I was created, and Satan's not my creator. Okay, because I've had people suggest that too. I was created by God in his image, not in the image of the rapist, on purpose for a purpose, which was not to be aborted. I actually had someone in my church parking lot very upset that the church was, had a position on abortion, right? And that they were doing a petition drive in the church. And she started like arguing with me about it and then brought up what about in cases of rape. And I told her how I was conceived and she's still like arguing with me. And then I asked her, did God not create me? And she stopped to think about it. Like, and I like, what are you thinking? Where in the Bible does it suggest that Satan creates people? And she says, all right, I'll give you that. Wow. Okay. God and I thank you, give credit where credit is due. And then I asked her the next most relevant question, which is, and did God not create me for a purpose? And she stopped to think about it and then responded by saying, I just think that God creates some people for the purpose of being aborted. No, no,
No.
no, he created me for good and not for evil. And there's just like all this scripture that tells us all that each one of us has a special purpose for our lives. And what man meant for evil, God can use for good. We're told that we're not to punish the child for the sins of the father, that each is to be punished for his own sin. Um, it's like Jesus was asked about the blind child, um, whose parent caused this sin, and it's like, no, no, that's not how it works. And he explained that to us. There's that story of the in Ezekiel 16, the child who's left by the side of the road, and it says that on the day you were born, it's like your mother was a Hittite, your father an Amorite, which makes it sound like they're kind of warring nations. Like maybe this was rape, or at least saying that you're a half breed. And it said, for on the day you were born, you were despised. And it said, no one had pity on you or care for you. It said that, I saw you there. God said, I saw you there lying on the side of the road with your cord still attached, which meant that baby would have bled to death. And it says, no, nobody had compassion on you, cared for you. It says, but I saw you and I said, live. And it says that God brought her in and cleaned her off and, raised her. And it's an allegory for God's love for Israel, but it shows God's heart. the ones who are the most forsaken, that even in scripture it says, though my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will receive me. And a father to the fatherless is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. In the New Testament, Jesus said, see that you do not, he, wait, first he said, he said, see that you do not despise any of these little ones. And it's like, well, who would despise a little one? Well, children were despised then and they are today. My people group get called demon seed, evil seed, horrible reminder, rapist child, um, tainting the gene pool. I'm called monster's child. I'm called um, rape trophy. People tell me that if you cared about your birth mother at all, you would have killed yourself a long time ago. Like, yeah, we're despised. Children with special needs have been called horrible things over time. And then Jesus goes on, next sentence, he says, for I tell you, there are angels in heaven always look upon the face of my Father in heaven.
Yes. And what about for those of our audience who say, well, okay, well, maybe this is a Christian perspective, right? What would your answer be to them?
So when I was in law school, I wrote a 43-page essay, The Right of the Unborn Child Not to Be Unjustly Killed, the Philosophy of Rights Approach. I wrote that when I was far from God. It's a secular piece because I was very frustrated with people who'd say, well, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in the Bible, so I'm pro-choice. Like there's no other rational justification for the pro-life position, and that's just wrong. And so I challenge anybody to read that piece. But we know that children, preborn children, are human in nature. They are alive. They're individuals developing from fertilization to birth. Scientifically, we know, they have a heartbeat. We know from conception whether they're male or female, and ascertainably so. In fertility clinics, they can tell whether a one-cell living human being is male or female. Like the science is all there. And we know that abortion ends a human life, stops a beating heart. When it comes to this concept of rape, in a civilized society, we do not punish innocent people for someone else's crime. Even when you plead guilty to a crime, you have to state in your own words what you did to commit that crime, because you can't say, well, I'll plead guilty on behalf of my wife. No, not allowed. That's unjust. We only punish we only punish the guilty, not innocent people, period. And it's simply barbaric to do otherwise. Um, I know that, there's no death penalty where you are. And in my home state of Michigan, there's never been the death penalty. I'm anti-death penalty because you don't punish a single innocent person. And our system of justice in the United States that says, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, right? That's a fiction. It's supposed to be a 99.9% certainty, but there's human error. There's even scientific error, things that happen in labs, and we cannot punish a single innocent person. And there's this thing called the Innocence Project for states where they do have the death penalty, where they finally get good legal counsel, people who volunteer spend their lives exonerating innocent people who are on death row. And, if in Europe there's no death penalty and you recognize that understanding that you don't kill a single innocent person, why would you be willing to kill the child conceived in rape? You don't believe the death penalty for rapists?
And even in general, yes. I mean, I found it so well put. I heard this at a March for Life, saying, we have abolished the death penalty for the guilty. Why do we still have it for the innocent? I mean, I think that just really summarizes it perfectly.
And when the Pope was a cardinal in Argentina, He said, here you say you do not have the death penalty, but I tell you, you have the death penalty because you have abortion in cases of rape.
Yes.
I wish
Yes.
he
And,
would be, I wish he'd be as bold today as he was then.
yes, yes. And, we really don't think about this implications because, um, most people, have this rape exception and they don't really think about, how that feels to somebody who is alive and they, were conceived in rape. How basically you are saying that they shouldn't be alive, somehow they are less worthy. This rape exception, I know this is something that you really work hard to, get, people to see it from a different perspective. Yes, fundamentally, it must be very painful, really, very personal to you, right?
The rape exception not only conveys a message to my people group that we're subhuman, that we deserve to die. Oftentimes people believe that we deserve to die at taxpayer expense. Um, Ouch, you know? Eh, but not only does it affect our people group in that way, but it also affects all of the mothers who are rape survivors, who are raising their children, who love their children. Because it's saying that, first of all, every time you hear someone say the child of a rapist, it makes it sound like that child belongs to him. Like he should have parental rights instead of ascribing the child to her, instead of saying the child of a rape victim. They have to hear that all the time, all the time. That child is the rapist child. That's not fair. And it doesn't help her to be protected from the rapist. And these mothers grieve for their children. They're like mama bear to hear people saying these kinds of things about their child. And they grieve that their child will have to grow up in a world where they're demonized and despised, and that one day they'll learn how they're conceived and hear how other people view them. It's very, very painful. And these mothers hate the way that their children are talked about.
Yes. And what percentage of pregnancies, well, specifically, obviously, in the United States, are due to rape? And then do we have any statistics on then what percentage of these women do choose life?
Yes. So it's estimated, you hear everyone say this, that roughly 1% of all abortions are in cases of rape. And they're also about 1% of the population because, the birth rate every year, because according to the only studies that have ever been done, the abortion rate for rape victims is actually half of the average unplanned pregnancy. So in the United States, over 50% abort in the average unplanned pregnancy. 25% choose adoption, and 15 to 25% abort. The majority of women are raising their children, rape victims raise their children. And as I said, 25% choose adoption, oftentimes because they just want to be protected from the rapist. But I've worked very hard to get a law passed in the United States and across the country called the Rape Survivor Child Custody Act to terminate parental rights without requiring a rape conviction using clear and convincing evidence standard. And I've advocated for this around the world. When I spoke in Poland, I spoke in their parliament at the same and introduced this concept to try to get it proposed in Poland. got it introduced in Malta, got it introduced in Brazil. Every country needs to have a law to terminate parental rights of rapists without requiring a rape conviction. For anybody who would fight that, it's ironic because you don't have to have a rape conviction for an abortion. In fact, most places, most jurisdictions don't even require a woman to have to report the rape. And I ask people, look, can you imagine supporting a law which would authorize rape victims to simply say rape, just say you were raped, and then it would be legal for them to hire someone, to pay someone to kill her rapist or just her innocent child? Because that's what abortion is. They're a hired hitman, a hired assassin. They're being paid to take someone out. They're being paid to kill someone. We don't have that kind of system of justice for the rapist where a woman can just say she's raped and she gets to pay an assassin to go have him killed. Can you imagine if someone actually proposed that kind of law, the kind of outrage that there would be? They'd say, whoa, 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 where's due process? Where's your right to trial? Where's your, what about your rights? Like, and no death penalty, no death penalty for rapists. Even though we have the death penalty federally in the United States and in some of the states, like I said, my home state, we don't have the death penalty. The US Supreme Court said in a case called Coker versus Georgia that rapists don't deserve the death penalty. And then there was a second case called Kennedy v. Louisiana, where the court said, even for child molesters, it's cruel and unusual punishment. So then how does the innocent child deserve to die for his crime?
Yes.
It's barbaric.
It is. It is. And, another factor of this exception that I've heard you highlight is that you say that in actual fact, this rape exception is actually protecting abusers and rapists. And could you really enlarge on that for our audience?
Well, I receive Google alerts daily. Anything having to do with conceived in rape, rape exception, pregnant by rape, accepting cases of rape. And I've done hashtag for years. I was doing hashtag rapists love abortion. And it was documented case after documented case of one abortion after another, where all it did was protect and enable the perpetrator to continue raping. Forced abortions, the abortion doctors didn't care. And all they did was protect and enable the rapist. Some of the most high profile cases around the world involving minors and late term abortions, where their mothers took them for abortion, come to find out that it was the mother who wanted the abortion to protect her boyfriend, to protect her husband, to protect herself from like public embarrassment, humiliation, so people would know that she failed to protect her own child. But the minor child didn't want the abortion. Oftentimes these victims, they see this child as their way out. The reason why you see these late-term abortions or people seeking late-term abortions is because the minor child knows she's pregnant and she's hiding it because she feels that finally she's got proof and this is going to be her way out of this abusive relationship, or she will have someone to love where she has not been loved and protected, oftentimes by her own mother. Now she will have someone to love. And so they hide this pregnancy from their own mothers. And that's why they often get taken in for these late-term abortions. We know that the younger a girl is, the more likely it is that it's someone in the household or a family member who's been raping her. And the more likely it is that it's been going on for years. And the more likely it is that she's very far along in her pregnancy. For a second trimester abortion, where they put her in a twilight state and she has to have her cervix dilated with laminaries. And that violent act is supposed to bring healing for her. They'll say things like the further along, well, no, they'll say that if she was forced to carry the baby full term, it would be dangerous for her life or health for a really young mother, a petite mother. And that's a true statement. But what they fail to disclose is that it's never the standard of care. When you have a young mother, petite mother, you always deliver early when it's
Yes.
fine for her health. You deliver at least 4 weeks early and she and the baby
Yes.
will be fine. But they don't disclose it. They don't give you the full picture and tell you the whole truth of the matter. There was a high profile case last summer after Roe v. Wade was overturned here in the United States after the Dobbs decision. And it was an abortion doctor in Indiana reported that she had a 10-year-old girl in her office that she performed an abortion on, and that her mother had brought her for an abortion because it became illegal in Ohio as soon as Roe versus Wade was overturned because they had a heartbeat bill. And so after 6 weeks, it was illegal to do an abortion. So her mother took her to Indiana.
Mm.
This doctor this time says she reported the rape. Usually they don't. Usually they're just covering it up and protecting, enabling the rapist. But in this instance, she reported the rape, but it was a false report because the girl's mother lied and said that it was an 18-year-old guy. This abortion doctor sent her back into the arms of her rapist for 10 days until a detective in Ohio who knew it's usually somebody in the household um, made an arrest. And the guy
Gosh.
confessed it was the mother's 28-year-old boyfriend. And he confessed. But even after he confessed, the girl's mother was still pleading for his innocence, pleading for him to be released
Yes.
and sent back into the house. And
Gosh.
that just proves exactly what we've always said. Rapists love abortion, and even her own mother is often trafficking her or just seeking to protect
Unbelievable.
her lover.
Unbelievable. These are completely things that are never spoken about in this issue, and it's so tragic, right? Because they really, claim to be wanting to help these women, but in actual fact, on multiple levels, are doing quite the opposite. And I really want to also ask you about your pro-life work and your organization, Save the One. Could you tell us about these?
Save the one, it comes from the parable of the lost sheep where Jesus it says the good shepherd left the 99 to save the one. We are a global network of over 1,200 now who were conceived and raped like me and mothers who became pregnant by rape. We have groups all over the world. So we have Save the One European Union on Facebook, and we have Save the One Africa. We have a young man who started Save the One Uganda. He was conceived and raped. And he actually worked with a young mother who I think was 14 who was pregnant from rape and brought her all kinds of diapers and baby clothes, all kinds of things to help her and to convince her to have this baby. And he told her about me, and she named her baby girl after me. I mean, it's pretty cool, pretty extraordinary to have this sort of global family. Um,
Yes.
we have Save the One Australia, and we have all over the United States. There's like Save the One Michigan, and like, all these regional groups. And then we have a special group. Well, we have Salvar el Uno, which is all in Spanish. We have a group that's all in um, Portuguese. And we have a book in Spanish with over 70 stories. We have a blog in Spanish, and we have hundreds of stories that have been published in English and in Spanish. We have videos. We have Spanish videos and in Portuguese. Our stories get published in all kinds of news outlets around the world. We give permission for people to translate our stories. My story's been translated into, I think, 24 different languages, and those are on my website. And then we have hundreds who were told by doctors to abort. So we have a carry to birth group, and we specialize in defending all of the so-called difficult cases in the abortion debate through our personal stories and through advocacy. I've spoken in parliaments all over Europe, all over the US, and in Latin America. Um, I love what I do. I feel like my life was spared for a purpose. Incidentally, we didn't cover this, but my birth mother tried to kill me at 2 illegal abortions and backed out because it was illegal. So I literally owe my birth to the Michigan law, which protected me 4 years before Roe versus Wade. And
Goodness me.
I don't feel like there's anything extra special about me or my life that I deserved it and millions of others didn't. No, I know my life was spared for a purpose, which is to go back and save others who are just as worthy of love
Yes.
and life as you or me.
Yes, and I know that you've also had a great impact politically, as well, as I mentioned in the introduction with Governor Rick Perry. Could you mention a few of these successes you've had?
Sure. I've changed hearts of politicians all over the world, and particularly this story of Governor Rick Perry during his presidential campaign, and Newt Gingrich, who had been Speaker of the House in the United States. He was a congressman for many years. And both of them, it was at the Citizens United premiere of the film The Gift of Life with Governor Mike Huckabee. Mine is one of several stories featured in this film. And it was held in between 2 presidential debates. And 4 presidential candidates spoke at the premiere. Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, um, former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum, the governor of Texas, Governor Rick Perry. He was governor at the time, and then former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And I told them my story, gave them my DVD, my business cards, conceived and raped, targeted for abortion, and told them, my story. And the 2 others, Michelle Bachmann and Rick Santorum, have both signed a personhood pledge 2 days earlier. It was a presidential pledge that came out from Personhood USA, and they both signed it immediately. It was no exceptions, no compromise pledge. And Perry and Gingrich had not signed it because they were both avowed to be rape exception candidates. And I was able to change Rick Perry's heart, and he said that he could not look me in the eyes and justify the rape exception any longer. He said he had never considered it from the perspective of someone like me. And he went on national television talking about our conversation.
Wow, that's incredible. Yes, goodness me.
There was I was speaking at an event in Canada for LifeSite News, or maybe Campaign Life Coalition in Canada. And I didn't know, it was kind of a surprise, but there was a Canadian senator who was introducing me. And he starts talking about how we had met years earlier, like, I don't know, 8 years earlier or 10 years earlier. And at the time, he was a member of parliament. And he made the rape exception. And he talked about how, after hearing me speak at this fundraiser, he stopped making the rape exception, and that I had totally changed his mind on that issue. And I was really moved. I was like in tears, like, wow, that was really touching the way he was. But that wasn't the end of the story. He said that later his wife was pregnant, and they received a diagnosis that their daughter had trisomy 18. And they were being told that they need to abort. And they were being pressured by doctors to abort. And he said, all I kept hearing was Rebecca's voice. Don't I deserve to live?
Wow.
And so he and his wife chose life for their child, um, because of my
Yeah.
story.
Yes.
And he said, so I didn't just change his heart politically, but personally.
Yes. Gosh, that's absolutely incredible, so moving. And, it really is unbelievable to see how your experience has really enabled you to see so clearly the value of every single human life, which I know is represented in Save the One, but also in a personal way through a baby you adopted. Could you tell us about that as well?
Baby Cassie was born, to everyone's surprise, with a serious genetic disorder called DeGeorge syndrome. And a lot of those children survive. First of all, trisomy 18, a lot of them don't survive because they're not treated. Same thing with trisomy 13. Nowadays, if you do choose life and you refuse the abortion, they'll send you home with perinatal hospice for the child to just die. And, some of these doctors are well meaning, but they don't know the breakthroughs that have been done here in the United States with a doctor who's willing to treat. The death mortality for children with trisomy 18 and trisomy 13 in the first year, for those who are born in the first year, 90% will die because they're not treated.
Mm.
This doctor here in my home state, through the vice president of my organization, Save the One, Brad Smith, and his wife, Jessie, they have a daughter with trisomy 18 who's 15 years old now. And they got a doctor to perform a surgery at the urging of Senator Rick Santorum, who, like I mentioned earlier, he has a daughter, Bella, with trisomy 18. And he got a doctor to do a revolutionary procedure. It's a jaw extraction and to do CPAP and some other things. And so they took his recommendation. And this doctor, one hospital said, nobody does that for these children. Nobody does that. Why bother? Well, now there's a doctor who specializes in this, and he's treated dozens. And there were only a couple of them who died, and that was because the parents came to them kind of late, and they weren't able to start the treatment soon enough. And one of the parents, they just wouldn't do the protocol. Um, so even in the most lethal of circumstances, these children can be treated. But DeGeorge syndrome, a lot of these children do survive, but they bully everybody to abort. And she had a lot of issues. And a cardiologist ended up taking her off of oxygen when she wasn't ready. We thought the hole in her heart was closing up, and he said that being on oxygen invited more fluid into the heart, into the lungs from the heart. And so he took her off oxygen. He was in a hurry. He didn't test her in advance. And she stopped breathing right after the appointment. We did CPR, EMS came, they resuscitated her. And then there was more medical malpractice from some residents, like student, physicians. And they did a procedure without the head doctor's permission to try to extract fluid from her lungs, and she stopped breathing again. By the time they resuscitated her the second time, she had significant brain damage. And they were doing epinephrine, and then they couldn't keep her blood pressure up any longer. And so um, she died in her arms. And it was, extremely painful at the time. It was the most painful thing I'd ever been through in my life. But she was precious, and I would do it all over again. She mattered. Cassie mattered.
Yes. Absolutely, and thank you so much for sharing that, because truly it's incredible to see how you have impacted so many people with your life, right? People never think about how it's, one life, but then everything that, that one life impacts. And we see that in your life. And I really want to close with a quote from you, actually, because I think it really encapsulates the importance of your story and your place in the pro-life movement and of people who are in the same situation of you. You say, I know that most people don't put a face to this issue, right, of pregnancy through rape, but for them it's just a concept. I do hope that as a child of rape, I can help put a face, a voice, and a story to this issue. And boy, I would say you really do. And thank you so much for all you do to protect these unborn children and really, truly stand by their mothers in the right way. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. If I could just end with two thoughts. First of all, as I said, there's about 300 blogs on our website. If there's anybody who is interested in translating these into another language, to make it available, you probably have people listening from all over Europe. So that's how Save the One in Spanish became so large. We had people, it started off with David Arbosch in Spain from Barcelona was translating some stories, and a young man from Argentina had been translating stories when he was just out of high school. And it was through that that we end up having this, like, we have over 100,000 followers on our Spanish page on Facebook. And we have all these other women now from all over Latin America and Spain sharing their stories. And then they translate them into English for us. There are people all over Europe who have these stories. They don't feel like they have a voice. If you start translating stories into their language, they will come forward. And you could start a whole page in your language, or if you have an pro-life organization, you can just be sharing these difficult case stories on your website, on your blog, and people will come forward and they can be part of a community. So I would encourage anybody who can translate, please do. And then the last thought is something that my daughter wrote when she was 6.5 years old. She surprised me. She told me she was writing a book, and she had these little pieces of paper and stapled it all together. And this is what she wrote: conceived in rape is not bad, because that's my mom. Rape is bad and abortion is bad, because they both hurt people. I just think, why can't people just understand that? It's so simple. Even a child can understand that.
Yes, yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.